The phone rang at 3 a.m., its shrill cry cutting through the silence of my modest home. I fumbled in the darkness, startled, until the familiar voice of my grandson trembled through the receiver. "Graham, don't say I called," he whispered, voice cracking. I overheard their conversation. "My name is Mildred and I am 78 years old. I've spent nearly 8 decades keeping my world orderly, gentle, and full of small, deliberate comforts. The worn quilt folded just so on the guest bed, the silver teaspoons lined in their drawer, the faded photographs of my family smiling from the walls. But tonight, the careful balance I had maintained seemed to teeter, and my heart thumped in a rhythm I hadn't felt since I was a mother watching over my children in the quiet hours. I eased into my armchair, the familiar creak of the leather under me grounding my nerves. My grandson's voice, barely more than a breath, painted a picture of a betrayal I hadn't anticipated. His words, shaky and urgent, spilled secrets I had only glimpsed in fragments, secrets that hinted at plans my own son and his wife were making behind closed doors, decisions that disregarded me entirely. Even as I listened, the world I had curated with such care, the linens starched and folded, the silver polished, the memories stored in drawers and albums, seemed fragile, as if one misstep could unravel it all. The house was quiet, but I could hear the weight of every small sound. The ticking clock on the mantel, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of the curtains in the night breeze. Every object around me held a memory, a fragment of my life, and suddenly each felt like a tiny tether, tying me to a past that others might dismiss. My grandson's tears pressed against my chest through the phone, and I felt a fierce protectiveness rise in me, a slow, simmering strength that had lain dormant beneath years of gentleness. I realized that what he had overheard wasn't just a family quarrel or idle gossip. It was a plan that threatened the home and life I had devoted myself to maintaining, piece by piece, memory by memory. As I sat in the darkness, cradling the phone like a lifeline, I remembered my late husband's words. "Mildred, a home is never just walls and a roof. It's a collection of all the little things you guard with your heart." And in that moment, I understood that it wasn't anger that I felt. It was resolve. My home had been my sanctuary for decades, and no whispered plan, no concealed decision, would strip it from me without a fight, quiet though it might be. I just had to wait, listen, and let the truth reveal itself. The next morning, the sun poured softly through the lace curtains, gilding my living room in a calm that felt almost cruel after the terror of the night. I moved slowly, as I always did, tending to the small rituals that kept my world in balance, folding the hand towels just so, checking that the tea kettle was polished, straightening the little figurines on the mantel. And yet something felt off. There were tiny disturbances, imperceptible to anyone else but glaring to me. The folded towels in the guest bathroom were slightly misaligned, the stack of my favorite plates had been shifted. A drawer I had never opened by anyone else was now slightly ajar. At first I blamed the wind or perhaps my own absent-mindedness. But deep down a shiver ran through me. My son and his wife arrived later that morning, cheerful and organized, moving through my home as though it belonged to them. They greeted me warmly, offering to help with the laundry and rearranging a few things for convenience. At first it felt like ordinary assistance, a courtesy. But as the hours passed, I noticed the little ways they insinuated control, folding my linens differently than I preferred, rearranging my cherished photo frames, nudging objects to new positions as if the history embedded in each one were meaningless. My eyes followed every subtle motion. A familiar vase was shifted. My favorite teacup no longer sat in its designated spot. Even the silver spoons were rearranged with a precision that mocked my habits. They smiled, laughed, and spoke of helping, but beneath the surface a coldness lingered, a quiet assertion that the home I had built, curated, and protected for decades was now theirs to organize. I felt a pang of sadness, mixed with a simmering unease as my mind drifted to memories stored in each object. That teacup had been a wedding gift from my mother, the vase a relic from my travels after my children were grown. Every folded towel reminded me of the nights I spent awake, ironing linens and tucking them neatly away so my family would feel cared for. These weren't just objects, they were pieces of my life, whispers of the years I had given to nurture this home. And now, as I watched my son and his wife move through it with ease, I understood that they saw the house only as space to inhabit, not as a sanctuary stitched together from decades of love, memory, and sacrifice. By afternoon, the tension settled like dust in the air, invisible but suffocating. My grandson called again, his voice a frightened tremor over the line. "Grandma, they're planning something. I don't know what, but it's not right." His words, laden with fear, felt heavier than anything I had carried in years. I clutched the phone to my chest and drew a deep, steadying breath. I knew then that the subtle microaggressions, the rearranged linens, the quietly manipulated objects were not trivial. They were testaments, small yet deliberate, signaling a growing audacity, a creeping disrespect that threatened to unravel everything I had built. And quietly, like water wearing stone, my resolve began to harden. I would not allow my home, my memories, my sanctuary, to be commandeered without a careful, deliberate response. The day wore on, each tick of the clock amplifying the oppressive weight of their presence. I moved through the house with deliberate care, touching the objects that mattered, arranging them in subtle ways to assert my presence. A hand on a teacup here, a careful fold of a towel there, small but firm reminders that this house was not theirs to conquer. And in that slow, simmering struggle, I realized something profound. It wasn't anger that would protect my home, it was patience, observation, and the quiet power that comes from knowing the truth, waiting for the right moment to reclaim it fully. By evening, the house had grown still again, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the familiar furniture I had arranged with care. I wandered from room to room, fingers brushing over the surfaces of tables, the spines of books, the delicate edges of embroidered pillows. Each object carried a memory, a story stitched into its very fibers. The soft hum of the radiator mingled with the quiet ticking of the clock, and I could feel the lingering presence of my son and his wife, even after they had retired to their rooms. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of intentions hidden behind polite smiles and helpful gestures. I paused at the photograph of my late husband, Charles, seated beside me on our wedding day, our smiles bright and unguarded. I traced the frame with a careful hand, remembering the nights we had spent building this home together, the long afternoons polishing silver, arranging the furniture just so, ensuring every corner whispered warmth and care. The intrusion of my son and his wife felt like a violation, subtle but deeply cutting. A drawer in the hallway had been left slightly open that morning, and I could still see the imprint of their fingers, touching items I had preserved for decades. Letters from old friends, a faded handkerchief from my mother, a small brass key that had opened the very first chest we bought together. Every small act of theirs was a reminder that the sanctuary I had created was being tested, questioned, and slowly manipulated. Memories washed over me, bittersweet and sharp. I remembered nights spent tucking my grandson in, reading him stories until his eyelids drooped, and the way he had once promised to guard our family secrets as if they were treasures. And now, at 78, I felt the responsibility of that promise reversed. He had come to me, trembling, at 3 a.m. because he knew I would understand, because he knew I would act not out of fury but out of a quiet, careful strength that had been honed over decades. I realized that my home, my sanctuary, was not just walls and furniture. It was every moment of love, every act of care, every small ritual that had shaped the life of this family. And in the subtle rearrangements of towels, the shifting of silver spoons, the casual nudging of photographs, I could see a challenge forming. Yet within me a slow-burning clarity emerged. This was not a battle to be fought with shouting or confrontation. It was a careful dance of observation and precision. I needed to understand, to see the full scope of their intentions before moving. My fingers lingered on the polished surfaces of the kitchen counter, the edges of the linen in the drawer, the gentle curve of a teacup handle. These were not mere objects. They were the markers of my presence, the silent proof that my home and my life could not be erased by whispered plans or subtle disrespect. As the night deepened, I returned to the living room and sat by the window, listening to the faint rustle of the wind through the trees, thinking of the conversation my grandson had overheard. Fear mingled with determination, and I understood something profound. The house had taught me patience, resilience, and quiet strength. And now, more than ever, it demanded that I embody these traits fully. No towel folded incorrectly, no drawer nudged aside, no photograph moved without my consent would go unanswered. This was my home, and I would guard it with the dignity and resolve that decades of life had instilled in me. The next morning brought a quiet, deceptive calm. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, glinting off the silverware I had polished the night before. At first, Everything appeared normal until I noticed the small, almost imperceptible changes. The teacups, which had always been arranged by size and age, were now scattered in a careless order. A folded towel, meticulously tucked on the lower shelf of the linen closet, had been unfolded and placed awkwardly on top of the stack. A single photograph, one of my husband and me at our 50th anniversary, had been nudged slightly askew on the mantel. To anyone else, these would have seemed trivial, but to me each displacement felt like a declaration, a subtle intrusion meant to unsettle, to assert control. My son and his wife moved through the home with a practiced ease, smiling and chatting as if nothing were amiss. They offered assistance with breakfast, rearranged drawers for convenience, and commented on the placement of dishes with a tone of casual superiority. Each gesture, polite on the surface, carried a faint edge of condescension. They didn't speak harshly, didn't demand anything outright, but the message was clear. This was no longer fully my domain. I could feel the weight of their presence pressing against the walls, the floors, the objects I had spent decades curating. Every shift of silver, every misaligned towel, every subtle displacement of cherished items felt like a quiet challenge to my authority, my history, my right to belong in my own home. I retreated to my small study, a room filled with my journals, family letters, and photographs, and sat at the desk where I had spent countless hours writing, reading, and remembering. I opened a drawer that I hadn't touched in months, seeking comfort among the familiar objects within. Letters from my mother worn at the edges, my father's old spectacles, a faded ribbon from my wedding bouquet. These tangible fragments of my past reminded me of who I was, what I had built, and why it mattered. It was here, surrounded by memory and history, that I realized the creeping pattern of control was no longer just about the physical objects. It was about eroding my confidence, testing the limits of my patience, and seeing how much of my life I would silently surrender. As I contemplated this, a pang of anger surfaced, mingled with a deeper sadness. I remembered the nights I had spent soothing my grandson, the evenings devoted to preparing family dinners, the years of quiet labor that had shaped this house into a home. And now I saw that the very people I loved most, the ones who should have understood and honored this legacy, were attempting to rewrite it item by item, gesture by gesture. My heart ached at the betrayal, yet beneath that ache, a quiet resolve began to crystallize. I would not allow these subtle manipulations to define me or my home. I would observe, record, and prepare for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. Later that afternoon, my grandson's call came again, voice trembling as he whispered warnings I could scarcely bear to hear. "Grandma, they're serious. I think they've already made some decisions." I saw papers on the table, but I didn't understand. It didn't feel right. The words struck me like a physical blow, but instead of panic, I felt a steadying clarity. This was the catalyst I had been waiting for, the sign that their subtle control had escalated into concrete action. The moment demanded patience and strategy, not shouting or confrontation. The house, my sanctuary, had taught me resilience, and now it would guide my next steps. I knew I had to act, quietly but decisively, before the foundation of my life, so painstakingly built, so tenderly preserved, was undermined entirely. That evening, the air in the house felt heavier, charged with the unspoken tension of hidden intentions. I wandered into the study once more, my fingers trailing along the spines of old books, lingering over the journals where I had poured out decades of thought, hope, and memory. My eyes fell on a folder slightly out of place, its corner peeking from beneath a stack of papers on the desk. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't mine. My pulse quickened as I carefully lifted the folder, the weight of its contents pressing with a cold certainty against my chest. Inside were documents I had never signed, decisions I had never approved, papers detailing plans that threatened the very ownership and control of the home I had nurtured for 78 years. I sank into the chair, hands trembling slightly as I read. The truth unfolded in black and white. Deeds, contracts, and authorizations that seemed almost casual in their presentation, yet carried the weight of finality. My son and his wife had taken steps behind my back, quietly maneuvering to assert authority over my property and the life I had built. Memories surged through me, the nights spent polishing silver, the hours arranging photographs, the decades of careful maintenance, and with each recollection, my chest ached with a mixture of betrayal and determination. It was not just the physical space that was threatened, but the sanctity of the life I had devoted myself to piece by piece. Yet amidst the initial shock, a quiet clarity emerged. This revelation did not weaken me, it galvanized me. I remembered the words my late husband had often whispered in quiet moments. Control what you can, protect what you love, and never let fear dictate your actions. The home, the objects, the memories, they were extensions of me, of my dignity, and no hidden document could strip them away without challenge. I carefully gathered the papers, studying each clause, tracing each signature. The betrayal was deep, yes, but it was also tangible. And tangible could be addressed, confronted, and if handled wisely, reversed. My grandson's words from that morning echoed in my mind. "Grandma, they're serious. I think they've already made some decisions." Yes, they were serious, but I was ready. Not with fury, not with loud confrontation, but with the calm precision that only years of life experience could cultivate. Each object I touched, the folded towels, the photographs, the teacups, was a reminder of my presence, a quiet assertion that this home was mine. And now, with the documents in my hands, I realized that the subtle microaggressions, the quiet manipulations had underestimated me. I had the truth, and with truth came the power to act, to reclaim, to restore. That night, I sat in my armchair, the folder of papers spread across my lap, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of the betrayal. And then, slowly, deliberately, I began to plan. The confrontation would not be loud or chaotic. It would be dignified, precise, and absolute. I would reclaim my home, my space, and my life, not through anger, but through the quiet, resolute strength that had carried me through decades of love, loss, and careful living. In that moment, the house seemed to breathe with me, as if recognizing that its guardian had awakened fully, ready to protect every memory, every object, every moment that had made this place a home. The following morning, the house felt like a battlefield cloaked in sunlight. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, every faint ticking of the clock seemed amplified, marking the passage of a tense, fragile time. I moved deliberately, my hands steady as I handled the objects around me, the teacups, the silver spoons, the embroidered napkins. Each placement, each adjustment, was both a comfort and a statement. This house belonged to me, and my care was not a courtesy to be overridden, but a legacy to be respected. My son and his wife wandered through, cheerful and seemingly unaware of the storm beneath the calm, yet I could sense their eyes darting, measuring, testing. I began with small, deliberate acts. A drawer slightly nudged out of place was returned to its proper alignment. The towels that had been carelessly folded were restored to their soft, precise stacks. Photographs subtly shifted to reclaim their rightful positions. These were not gestures of anger, but of quiet authority. Each movement reinforced my presence, my ownership, my memory embedded in every object. I could feel their subtle tension, the faint hesitation in their smiles, the way my son's hand lingered over a misplaced fork before retreating. The microaggressions, which had once seemed innocuous, began to falter under the weight of my steady vigilance. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere had thickened with unspoken acknowledgement. My grandson watched from the doorway, eyes wide, as I moved with an almost ceremonial care through the kitchen and living room. "Grandma," he whispered, voice trembling, Are you going to tell them?" I shook my head gently. Not yet. There was power in observation, in precision, in the patience to wait until the moment was fully mine. I set the papers, the folder that had revealed the betrayal, on the center table, positioning them as if by accident, while my hands rested lightly on the objects around me. The room held its breath, the subtle weight of history pressing against the present, and I could sense that the house itself recognized the shift. The quiet guardian was awake. As evening approached, they attempted another subtle challenge. A silver ladle, one I had always reserved for special occasions, was left in the sink rather than returned to its drawer. A linen napkin, folded with care the night before, had been flattened and tossed onto the counter. Their actions were casual, polite, almost dismissive, but I had learned to read these gestures as clearly as spoken words. I picked up the ladle, held it for a moment, feeling the cool weight of it in my hand, and placed it precisely where it belonged. I refolded the napkin, laying it gently atop the others, my movements slow and deliberate. Each act, though silent, carried an unspoken message. I was present, aware, unyielding. That night, after they had retired to their rooms, I sat in my armchair once more, the folder of papers open before me. The betrayal had been exposed, and the subtle manipulations had been addressed with quiet precision. I could feel the first threads of control returning to my hands, the gentle, steady assurance that this house, this life was still mine. And yet, I knew the true confrontation was coming, the moment when patience would yield to action, and when the dignity I had preserved for decades would face the final test. I welcomed it, calm and resolute, ready to assert the quiet, unshakable authority that had been forged by years of love, memory, and unwavering care. The following morning carried an unusual stillness, as if the house itself were holding its breath in anticipation. I walked slowly through the rooms, eyes tracing the lines of furniture, the placement of objects, the angles of photographs. Each detail mattered. Every small displacement from the day before had been corrected, yet the subtle tension in the air lingered. My son and his wife moved about with practiced ease, yet I could feel their uncertainty, a quiet hesitation that had never existed before. They were testing boundaries, perhaps unaware that the patient observer in the corner, the quiet woman who had spent 78 years crafting this life, was ready to assert herself. Began with the kitchen. A drawer left slightly ajar, silver utensils misaligned, a teacup out of place, each act a silent challenge. I bent to adjust them, my movements deliberate and careful. But this time I did more than restore order. I placed the folder of papers I had discovered the night before atop the kitchen table, edges perfectly aligned, corners sharp. It was visible without being confrontational, a quiet reminder that I was aware, that the rules of this house had not been forgotten. My grandson lingered nearby, eyes wide, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Grandma," he whispered, almost afraid to speak. I smiled gently, reassuring him with my presence alone. "Patience, dear. Everything in its time." By mid-afternoon, the microaggressions escalated subtly. My son moved a photograph on the mantel, not just nudging it but replacing it entirely with a frame I had never chosen. His wife commented on the placement of the silverware, suggesting that my arrangement was inconvenient. Their smiles were polite, their voices light, but the undertone was unmistakable. I felt the surge of emotion that had always accompanied such intrusions: betrayal, frustration, and beneath it all, a quiet, simmering resolve. I did not respond immediately. I observed, measured, and allowed the tension to build, letting the truth of my presence settle over them. That evening, the confrontation began to take shape, not through words but through intention. I gathered myself in the living room, standing near the objects they had attempted to manipulate. Each photograph, each teacup, each towel was a marker of my history, my care, my presence. My eyes met theirs across the room. My son's smile faltered. His wife's voice grew hesitant. I spoke softly, deliberately, letting each word land with precision. "This is my home," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "These walls, these objects, these memories, they are mine to care for. You've mistaken hospitality for ownership." The room grew heavy with silence. I watched as comprehension slowly dawned in their eyes, the recognition that their subtle attempts at control had met something they had not anticipated: quiet, deliberate strength. There was no yelling, no dramatics, only the weight of truth, the force of decades of life experience, the dignity of a woman who understood her worth and her rights. My grandson's hand brushed mine lightly, a small gesture of solidarity, and I felt the surge of protective pride that had carried me through this ordeal. The house, my sanctuary, seemed to exhale in relief, the walls resonating with the quiet authority I had restored. By the time night fell, the tension had shifted. My son and his wife retreated, no longer challenging, no longer rearranging, no longer asserting control. The quiet dignity of my stance had rewritten the rules, reminding them and myself that a home is more than walls and furniture. It is the presence, care, and memory of those who inhabit it. And as I sat once more in my armchair, tracing the familiar outlines of objects that had been tested and reclaimed, I felt the deep, steady warmth of victory, not loud, not flamboyant, but precise, patient, and profoundly satisfying. The next morning, the house carried a new rhythm, one that felt grounded in my presence and awareness. Sunlight streamed through the windows, glancing off polished silver and gleaming countertops, illuminating a home that once again reflected the life I had carefully cultivated over 78 years. My son and his wife moved about with an uneasy attentiveness, their casual confidence replaced by cautious observation. They no longer dared to nudge a towel or rearrange a photograph. and I could see the recognition in their eyes that my quiet, deliberate assertion of authority had shifted the balance. I walked slowly through each room, taking in the subtle victories that had already been won. The teacups were aligned, the linens perfectly folded, photographs restored to their rightful places. Each object was more than just a possession, it was a fragment of memory, a tangible echo of decades of care, love, and history. I paused at the kitchen table where the folder of documents still lay, untouched, a silent reminder of the revelation that had sparked this reclamation. I traced the edge of a photograph near it, my fingers lingering over the familiar texture of aged paper, feeling the warmth of memories that no subtle manipulation could erase. My grandson appeared beside me, peeking cautiously around the corner, as if hesitant to disturb the calm I had restored. "Grandma, is it really over?" he whispered. I smiled, bending slightly to ruffle his hair, a small gesture loaded with reassurance. "Yes, dear. It's over. For now, we've taken back what matters." His relief was palpable, a quiet echo of the strength and resolve I had summoned in the face of betrayal. Together we moved through the house, attending to the details, reinforcing order, and reclaiming the rhythm of our home. It was a slow, deliberate process, and yet every corrected object, every restored photograph, every carefully folded towel felt like a small triumph, a reaffirmation that this sanctuary was ours to protect and cherish. By afternoon, the tension had eased into a fragile harmony. My son and his wife lingered in the living room, subdued and polite, but no longer intrusive. Their smiles were tentative, their gestures careful, as though they had finally learned the lesson I had imparted, not through anger or harsh words, but through the quiet, unyielding strength of presence and patience. The air seemed lighter, the house breathing again, walls resonating with the quiet power of someone who had weathered fear, betrayal, and subtle challenge, and emerged not just intact but whole. As evening settled in, I moved to my favorite armchair by the window, a cup of tea cradled in my hands. I looked around the room, eyes tracing the familiar contours of objects, the soft glow of memory in every corner. The house felt restored not just in its physical form but in its spirit, in the balance of respect and care that had been reasserted. And in that moment, I understood a profound truth. The value of a home, the weight of a life, and the depth of family are measured not by the loudness of confrontation, but by the quiet, deliberate defense of what matters most. My sanctuary was mine once more, and with it came a sense of peace, dignity, and unshakable resolve that no subtle betrayal could ever diminish. The following day, I sensed a shift in the house, a subtle recognition that the quiet strength I had summoned was no longer in question. My son and his wife moved with careful deliberation, avoiding the gestures and rearrangements that had once tested me. But I knew the true moment of reckoning was near. The small victories of restored towels, realigned photographs, and polished silver had paved the way, yet the confrontation, the one that would fully cement the authority of my presence, still loomed. I prepared, quietly, methodically, allowing my calm resolve to settle over the house like a gentle, unyielding tide. When my son entered the living room that afternoon, attempting the familiar charm of casual conversation, I held my ground. I let the moments stretch, watching him, listening to the cadence of his voice, observing the subtle hesitations that had not been there before. I noticed the careful avoidance of certain objects, the teacups, the silver spoons, the photographs, tiny reminders of the boundaries I had restored. And finally I spoke, my voice soft but firm, cutting through the careful politeness with precision. "This is my home," I said. The words were simple, almost ordinary, but they carried decades of care, love, and quiet vigilance. My son paused, surprise flickering in his eyes, while his wife's expression tightened, the edge of discomfort revealing the truth they had tried to mask. "You've mistaken hospitality for ownership," I continued, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of every object, every memory, every hour spent tending this home. The room seemed to still, as if the walls themselves were listening. I could see the shift in their posture, the subtle acknowledgement that the quiet woman before them, the one they had underestimated, was neither fragile nor unaware. She was resolute, precise, and wholly capable of reclaiming the life and home she had nurtured for decades. My grandson, standing quietly in the doorway, watched the exchange with wide eyes, relief mingling with awe. He understood that this confrontation, though calm, had been long in the making, a reclaiming of power measured not by volume or force, but by dignity and unwavering presence. I walked slowly toward the mantel, adjusting a photograph with deliberate care, my movements an unspoken assertion that I controlled the space, that the history embedded in every object was mine to honor. "You will respect this home," I said softly, eyes meeting theirs, "because it is not just a house, it is the sum of a lifetime, the care of decades, and the memories of generations. And I will not stand by while that is disregarded." Their silence was telling, a tacit admission that my quiet, deliberate authority had redefined the rules. No words of apology were necessary. The understanding had been conveyed through presence, precision, and the resolute calm of someone who knew her worth. As I returned to my armchair by the window, the sun casting long, gentle shadows across the room, I felt the weight of resolution settle over the house. The objects, the memories, the space itself, all were restored, reaffirmed, and respected. My grandson crept quietly beside me, and together we let the soft calm of evening wash over us, knowing that the sanctity of our home had been reclaimed. And in that quiet, measured victory, I understood something universal. True strength is not loud but deliberate. It is quiet, patient, and unshakable, rooted in dignity and care. By the following morning, the atmosphere in the house had shifted almost imperceptibly, yet profoundly. Every corner seemed to hum with quiet affirmation. The polished silver gleamed with the care I had reinstated, the linens were folded with the precision of years, and each photograph, each trinket, each cherished object stood exactly where it had belonged for decades. My son and his wife moved cautiously, polite smiles masking the recognition that the dynamic had changed irreversibly. They no longer tested boundaries. Instead, they skirted them, aware that the gentle woman before them was a force far beyond the subtle control they had once attempted. I moved through the rooms deliberately, adjusting a napkin here, aligning a spoon there, making sure every object reflected the rhythm, care, and history of a life lived intentionally. Each small act was both restorative and declarative, a reaffirmation that my presence, my memory, my home could not be rewritten by casual manipulation. The folder of papers, the documents revealing their plans, remained visible on the center table, not as a weapon, but as a quiet testament to truth, to vigilance, and to the resilience that had brought me to this point. My grandson lingered nearby, wide-eyed but calm, sensing the restored equilibrium and the subtle power of measured dignity. Later in the afternoon, I confronted them directly, the moment having arrived with the precision of timing I had cultivated over decades. My voice was soft, steady, and deliberate. "I have observed, I have waited, and I have listened. This is my home, my sanctuary, and my life's work. It will be respected, or it will remain untouched by those who cannot honor it." My son's gaze faltered, his wife's polite expression cracking for the briefest instant. I did not need to raise my voice. The weight of decades, the gravity of lived experience, and the deliberate calm of a life fully aware of its worth carried the confrontation far more powerfully than any shout could have. I moved through the living room, touching the objects that mattered most. A silver spoon, a teacup, the edges of photographs. Each gesture reinforced the unspoken message. This house is a repository of memory, care, and life, not a stage for subtle domination or disrespect. Their eyes followed me, silent acknowledgement in the quiet tension. My grandson reached for my hand, a small reassurance that I was not alone, that our presence and vigilance were aligned. In that calm, deliberate assertion, I could feel the full weight of restored authority, the quiet victory of dignity over intrusion. By evening, the home felt whole again. My son and his wife moved about with careful politeness, a tacit recognition that the balance had been restored. I settled into my armchair by the window, a warm cup of tea in hand, and let the familiar calm of the house envelop me. Every object, every shadow, every shaft of sunlight was testimony to the strength that had reclaimed the space. I realized then that true authority does not demand loud confrontation. It resides in patience, in careful observation, in the deliberate assertion of what one knows to be right. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the house exhaled with me, restored, honored, and at peace once more. The night settled softly over the house, the glow from the lamps casting warm pools of light across familiar surfaces. I sat in my armchair by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and let the quiet of the restored home seep into my bones. Every object seemed to hum with renewed purpose. The polished silver reflected the lamplight like tiny beacons, The linens retained their careful folds, and the photographs, restored to their rightful places, captured decades of life and love. The house, once tense and shadowed with subtle intrusion, now radiated calm. It was as if every corner recognized that its guardian had awakened fully, ready to protect what mattered most. My grandson sat quietly nearby, a gentle presence that reminded me why I had persevered. He had been my early warning, my link to the truth that had initially alarmed me, and now he was a witness to the careful restoration of order and dignity. "Grandma," he whispered, voice soft, "everything feels right again." I nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, feeling the truth of his words sink deep. Indeed, the home felt right not because of walls or furniture, but because of the respect, care, and love that had been reasserted. It was more than restored, it was reaffirmed. In the quiet, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The subtle microaggressions, the shifted towels, the nudged photographs, all had been early warnings, tests of patience and resolve. The discovery of the hidden documents, the betrayal behind closed doors, had been the catalyst, awakening a strength I had not realized I still carried. And yet, the reclaiming of authority had not come through anger or loud confrontation, but through measured action, deliberate precision, and unwavering calm. Each movement, each adjustment, each quiet assertion of presence had been a statement. This home, this life, these memories belong to me, and they will be honored. As I sat back in the armchair, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and quiet power. The confrontation had been resolved, the boundaries firmly re-established, and the subtle chaos of intrusion replaced with deliberate order. My son and his wife, now subdued, moved through the home with careful politeness, their awareness of my authority both evident and unspoken. It was a delicate balance, achieved not through harsh words but through the quiet, precise assertion of dignity and presence. My grandson's small hand on mine, the familiar weight of the cup, the steady hum of the house, all combined to form a profound sense of completion. I realized as I traced the familiar contours of objects I had long cherished, that strength and resilience do not require loud displays. They are quiet, deliberate, patient, and measured. They emerge through action, observation, and the unwavering defense of what one knows to be right. And in this restored home, surrounded by the objects and memories that had defined a lifetime, I felt whole again, reclaimed, honored, and at peace. The house, like me, had endured, survived subtle challenges, and emerged stronger, carrying the proof that dignity and quiet strength will always prevail over manipulation and betrayal. The morning light spilled gently through the curtains, painting the familiar furniture with a golden glow that seemed to bless the restored harmony of the house. I lingered by the window for a long moment, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The sun's rays glinted off the polished surfaces of the tables and counters, reflecting faint sparks into the room like scattered jewels. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, each one suspended as if to witness the quiet victory I had achieved. I inhaled deeply, letting the faint aroma of aged wood, polished silver, and lingering traces of yesterday's tea fill my senses. Every breath carried a whisper of memory, of decades of care, labor, and life lived in deliberate attentiveness. I moved slowly through each room, fingers trailing along the polished surfaces, the smooth edges of the tables, the soft folds of linen tucked neatly into drawers and cabinets. The textures spoke to me, the cool weight of silver cutlery, the slightly uneven softness of aged lace, the faint ridges of photographs worn by time. Each object carried its story, each shadow held a memory, and in that quiet ritual, I felt the full weight of what had been reclaimed. My husband's favorite chair, once worn with decades of reading and conversation, seemed to sigh under my touch. The wooden frames of photographs, our wedding, the first day we brought our children home, the anniversary celebrations, glowed with the accumulated warmth of years, as if acknowledging that their caretaker had returned, resolute and whole. This home, my sanctuary, was once again a reflection of my life, my care, and the decades of love woven into its walls. My son and his wife lingered in the background, subdued and polite, their earlier confidence replaced with a tentative respect that hung in the air like an invisible boundary. There were no words of apology, no grand gestures, just the subtle, unspoken acknowledgement that the authority of this home resided with me, that the memories, the objects, the care embedded in every corner were not theirs to rewrite. I watched their movements carefully, the way my son's hand hovered over the edge of a counter before retreating, the gentle hesitation in his wife's smile as she set a cup of tea upon the table. Their polite gestures were now tempered with awareness, their casual invasions replaced by cautious observation. My grandson hovered nearby, silent but watchful, a living reminder of why vigilance and quiet strength matter. He had been the first to alert me to the undercurrent of manipulation, the first to trust that I could recognize the truth behind the smiles and polite words. He followed me with wide eyes as I moved through the living room, adjusting the alignment of a photograph, straightening the embroidered cushions on the sofa, and ensuring the polished silver gleamed with careful precision. Each small act was deliberate, a reaffirmation that I remained the keeper of this home, the guardian of the memories embedded in every object, every corner, every shadow. As I worked, the memories came in waves. I remembered the nights spent rocking my children to sleep, the long afternoons of polishing silverware while humming old lullabies, the countless hours arranging photographs and letters, each with the precision and care that only love can instill. The aroma of tea reminded me of afternoons spent with my late husband, Charles, sipping quietly on the porch as he read the newspaper and I arranged flowers in the vase he adored. I remembered the subtle moments, like the first time my grandson had drawn a picture of our house, insisting that every detail from the curtains to the doorknobs be exactly right. Each memory was tied to an object, each object a testament to the life that had been lived with care, thoughtfulness, and love. The confrontation had passed not with chaos or raised voices, but with the unshakable dignity of a life fully aware of its worth. I had watched subtle manipulations, microaggressions, and hidden plans unfold, and I had responded not with fury, but with deliberate precision. I remembered the folded towels that had been unfolded in the linen closet, the silver spoons that had been casually misaligned, the photographs that had been nudged aside. Each act had been a test, a quiet challenge meant to unsettle, to assert dominance over a space that I had tended with decades of love and care. And yet, I had met every small intrusion with deliberate correction, with careful attention, and a calm authority that required no loud words. Each restored object, each careful adjustment, each measured word had been a reclaiming of what was rightfully mine. I paused by the mantel, my fingers brushing lightly over a photograph of my husband and me on our 50th anniversary. The glass was cool beneath my touch, yet it carried the warmth of the morning sun spilling through the curtains, pooling across the polished wood like molten gold. I inhaled slowly, and the faint scent of aged wood mingled with the lingering aroma of tea, polished silver, and the subtle fragrance of dried roses I had pressed decades ago into books and drawers. The photograph was more than a captured moment. It was a portal to a life carefully built, to years of laughter and quiet moments stitched together by love, persistence, and deliberate care. I remembered the day vividly. The sun had been a generous witness, casting its warm light over the roses in full bloom. Their petals glowed in shades of crimson, ivory, and blush, filling the garden with a delicate fragrance that danced in the air alongside the sound of children laughing and scurrying about, preparing for the family celebration. My husband had been smiling in that way he always did, calm and unassuming, yet with an energy that could fill a room. I remembered how he had straightened my lapel, careful with each button, murmuring a quiet compliment about how radiant I looked, even after decades of shared life. The children had tugged at each other, some laughing, some pretending to fuss, their joy spilling over in an effortless, unplanned harmony. The photograph captured it all. The sunlight, the laughter, the roses, our family's intertwined lives, and I had returned to it countless times over the years, drawing strength and perspective from that frozen moment. The photograph had always been my touchstone, a reminder that life is measured not by moments of anger or confrontation, but by the small, deliberate acts of love and care that shape a home. I straightened the frame gently, noting the faint reflection of sunlight in the glass. The way the light hit it reminded me of the warmth that had always underpinned our family life, a quiet force that no amount of conflict, subtle or otherwise, could diminish. I felt a quiet surge of triumph as I did so. The home was mine again, not because of documents or confrontation, but because of patience, vigilance, and the quiet assertion of presence over intrusion. Every object in the room seemed to hum with recognition, as if acknowledging that I had returned to my rightful place. The armchair where I sat for hours reading aloud to my children, now polished and free from the careless fingerprints of others, seemed to exhale a soft, approving sigh. The silver candlesticks on the mantel glinted in the sun, straightened with meticulous care, each reflecting not only the light but decades of ritual and memory. I traced a finger along the lace-edged table runner, feeling its delicate texture and recalling the afternoons I had spent stitching each intricate pattern by hand, humming quietly as my hands worked. This house was more than walls and furniture. It was the repository of decades of thought, attention, and affection, a sanctuary built one deliberate act at a time. Across the room, my grandson's eyes were wide with awe and understanding. He had witnessed the subtle dynamics, the tension, the careful reclamation of authority, and now he saw the quiet victory unfold. I could see the wheels turning behind his gaze, the slow comprehension of the lessons of patience, observation, and dignity. "Grandma," he whispered, voice trembling slightly as he spoke, "everything feels right again." I nodded gently, placing a hand on his shoulder and feeling the warmth of his small hand pressing lightly against mine. The touch was grounding, a physical connection that carried reassurance, comfort, and unspoken understanding. "Yes, dear," I said softly, "it's right again. For now we've taken back what matters." My words were simple, but they carried the weight of decades of experience, careful observation, and the unwavering knowledge that some things, home, memory, love, cannot be taken by subtlety or deceit alone. As I spoke, my mind wandered back to the moments that had shaped this understanding. I remembered the nights my husband and I had spent in quiet companionship, the mundane routines that had become rituals of care, folding laundry together on rainy afternoons, polishing silverware while our children played around our feet, sharing a cup of tea on the porch as the day faded. Each act had seemed small in isolation, but together they wove the fabric of our home, a home where care, patience, and attention to detail were not luxuries but necessities. It was these rituals, these deliberate moments, that had forged a sanctuary that no subtle manipulation could entirely unsettle. I also recalled the subtle moments of challenge, the microaggressions, the quiet tensions that had arisen when others had tried to assert dominance or rewrite the order of my home. A towel carelessly unfolded in the linen closet, a photograph nudged slightly out of place, the silver spoon slightly misaligned in its drawer. All of these had been tests, small ripples in the calm of my sanctuary. And yet each had been met not with anger, but with observation, precision, and quiet correction. The restoration of order was itself a declaration. The home, these objects, these memories, were under the stewardship of someone who understood their value and would defend them with unwavering patience. The morning light grew stronger, spilling over the carpet, the armchairs, the polished surfaces. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny golden stars, each catching the sunlight and reflecting a hint of the beauty in the ordinary. My grandson shifted closer, his small hand still holding mine, and I felt the continuity of generations. A bridge of care, observation, and quiet vigilance that linked past, present, and future. "Grandma," he murmured again, "I think I understand now, how you knew everything would be okay." I smiled gently, my eyes following the sun's light across the familiar room. "Yes, dear," I said, my voice carrying calm authority. "Everything we care for, our home, our memories, our love, cannot be stolen if we tend it carefully, if we are patient, and if we never forget what it is worth." I could see comprehension dawning in his eyes, and the small sigh of relief he let escape was a balm in itself. As the day drifted toward evening, the house seemed to breathe with me, the rhythm of its familiar walls and well-loved corners syncing with the quiet beat of my own heart. I moved deliberately through the kitchen first, running my fingers along the smooth, polished surfaces of the counters, feeling the faint undulations in the wood grain beneath my touch. The copper pots hanging above the stove caught the last rays of sunlight, glinting like faint stars, and I paused to straighten each one, turning it just slightly so that the reflections danced evenly across the tiles behind. The smell of faint herbs lingering in the air, a hint of rosemary from last week's soup, traces of dried basil from a jar I had forgotten to empty, reminded me of the care I had always invested in nurturing not only the home but the sustenance it provided. Every spoon, every ladle, every folded dishcloth was a testament to careful stewardship, and as I straightened them in deliberate order, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a space fully reclaimed. From the kitchen, I moved into the living room, where the afternoon light painted long, soft shadows across the plush rugs and polished floors. My gaze lingered on the small details that spoke volumes. The crease in a folded napkin placed just so on the side table, the alignment of silver spoons in their drawer, the gentle tilt of a photograph on the mantel that captured my husband's easy smile and our children laughing on some long-past summer afternoon. These were not trivialities. They were affirmations of presence, guardians of memory, symbols of the careful attention and love that had built this sanctuary. Each movement was deliberate, a quiet declaration of authority, a reinforcement of what had been reclaimed after weeks of subtle intrusion and tense anticipation. The couch cushions, plumped and aligned, seemed to acknowledge my touch, their embroidered fabric soft under my fingertips as I smoothed each crease. I paused to adjust the lace-edged runner along the coffee table, the delicate threads worn slightly from decades of care, yet resilient like the memories it carried. I inhaled deeply, letting the familiar sense of polished wood, faint perfume from flowers long past, and the lingering warmth of sunlight fill me with calm. This house had endured as had I, and now it seemed to exhale with a collective sigh, the relief of having its caretaker restored to her rightful place. Across the room my grandson watched silently, a quiet presence that carried as much weight as any spoken word. His eyes followed me as I moved with deliberate precision, the subtle movements of my hands aligning objects, adjusting frames, straightening fabric. He had witnessed the tension, the subtle microaggressions that had threatened the calm of our home, and now he absorbed the culmination of patient, deliberate action, watching order reassert itself without a word raised in anger. His small hand rested lightly on my armchair as he leaned slightly forward, eager yet reverent, as if understanding that this restoration was more than physical. It was symbolic, a lesson in patience, dignity, and quiet authority. I moved down the hallway slowly, letting my fingers skim the polished wooden banister, recalling the countless times I had guided children along these same steps, laughter echoing in the quiet spaces, tiny feet patting against the hardwood. Each door, each knob, each subtle dent in the wood had its own story, a testament to years of care, of family life unfolding in predictable, meaningful patterns. The photographs lining the hallway walls bore witness. Birthday parties and holidays, quiet afternoons in the garden, graduations and family dinners, moments that had seemed ordinary at the time but now formed the intricate tapestry of a life fully lived. I straightened a picture that had shifted slightly from a careless hand, pausing to remember the moment it had captured. My husband holding a baby in his arms, smiling down at our first child, laughter frozen in time. My chest tightened with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude, grief for the years past and joy for having been able to witness and nurture these moments. The living room awaited, now bathed in the amber glow of the late afternoon sun. Shadows stretched long and languid across familiar surfaces, painting the furniture and walls with a soft, forgiving light. I returned to my favorite armchair by the window, the one where I had spent countless hours reading, knitting, and watching my family move through life. Cradling a cup of tea in my hands, I watched the steam curl upward in delicate wisps, carrying with it the faint aroma of chamomile and honey. The warmth seeped not only into my fingers but deep into my heart, a quiet affirmation of the sanctuary we had preserved. Memories crowded in, unbidden but welcome, each one connected to a particular object or scent. I thought of the silver ladle polished on Sunday mornings, the teacup my husband had favored for his evening tea, the hand-embroidered linen my mother had taught me to fold with precise care. Each item carried a story, a fragment of our shared life, and I traced them with my eyes, allowing each memory to ripple gently through me. The photographs, the silver, the linens, the furniture, all were more than objects. They were vessels of memory, tangible anchors to a life carefully cultivated. The weeks prior had been fraught with subtle invasions, whispered conversations, and hidden documents that threatened the sanctuary I had nurtured for decades. Each microaggression had been deliberate, calculated to unsettle, to provoke, to assert dominance over a space that was not theirs to command. Yet they had underestimated one thing: the quiet resilience of a life lived fully, deliberately, and with unwavering care. Every misaligned photograph, every nudged silver spoon, every unnoticed shift of a towel had only awakened within me a deeper resolve. I understood, more keenly than ever, that true authority is not declared in anger but reclaimed through patient, meticulous, and deliberate action. My grandson remained quietly by my side, eyes wide, absorbing every subtle gesture, every movement. He understood without words the unspoken lesson unfolding before him, that patience and observation are more powerful than impulsive confrontation, that dignity is maintained not through volume but through measured, intentional action. He followed my eyes as I scanned the room, appreciating the alignment of objects, the careful folding of linens, the gentle angle of a photograph catching the last rays of sunlight. He was witnessing a quiet triumph, a reclaiming of what had always been ours, a reaffirmation that love, care, and diligence cannot be subverted by the careless or deceitful. I let my gaze sweep across the room once more, from the mantel to the bookshelves, from the counters to the soft folds of linen. Each object told a story, each shadow whispered a memory. I felt the culmination of years of careful observation, of patience tested, of vigilance exercised in small, deliberate acts that had preserved this sanctuary. The home was more than bricks, mortar, and furniture. It was a living testament to perseverance, love, and quiet authority, the physical embodiment of the values that had guided me through decades of life. And finally, as night fully embraced the house, I leaned back in my armchair, the warm tea resting lightly in my hands, and whispered softly to myself, almost as if the walls themselves would carry my words. A home is not merely a place. It is a reflection of the life lived within it, the care invested, and the memories preserved. Respect it, nurture it, protect it, and it will carry you through even the quietest storms. I smiled, feeling a gentle certainty settle deep within me, knowing that some things, love, memory, dignity, can never be taken, only honored. The house, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight streaming through the curtains, seemed to hum with quiet approval, each shadow, each surface, each object resonating with the legacy of care that had endured, survived, and reclaimed its rightful order. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the tea, the weight of my grandson's hand, the calm presence of everything I had fought for and preserved. The quiet of the night, the presence of life, and the unwavering recognition of what truly matters. A home nurtured by love, patience, and dignity filled me completely. And there, in the gentle embrace of evening, I understood fully the universal truth of what I had fought to protect. That home is not only a physical space, but a testament to patience, care, resilience, and the quiet strength that endures when respect and love are upheld. And I knew without doubt that these treasures, carefully guarded and honored, would continue to endure long after the voices of intrusion had faded into memory.